Hi, my name's Stein, and today I'd like to talk to you about child attachment and domestic violence. To start off with, let's have a look at a biblical perspective. See, the idea of attachment is not new to the biblical narrative. God created humans to be in relationship, both with their Creator and with others. He created families for children to be nurtured and loved in a safe environment. God knew that humankind needed relationships to grow from children into healthy and balanced adults. He also initiated the idea that a person should leave their mother and father and be joined with their spouse in marriage. Insecure attachment through broken relationship is part of the fallen world we live in, where humankind needs to be restored to relationship with God. For this reason, Jesus came to earth to bring a message of love and hope and peace and restoration to a broken world. Attachment theory. So attachment theory is one of the most influential theories dealing with connectedness between infants, children and their primary caregiver. With its foundations in neurology and brain development, attachment theory is based on the understanding that the right hemisphere of the brain is relied upon for social emotional functioning, and this part of the brain develops in the early months and years of a child's life. The importance of early attachment is paramount to effective brain development and secure attachment between the mother or caregiver and the infant, and has implications in the development of the child's neurological, physiological and social behaviour. It was actually Bowlby who was one of the first proponents of attachment theory. Mary Ainsworth conducted research into how young children develop and attach to their primary caregiver. Ainsworth, through the Strange Situation Project and her work in Uganda, noticed and formulated the various forms of secure and insecure attachment. Insecure attachment can actually lead to a range of attachment types. There's insecure ambivalent attachment, which has long-term results in social anxiety and inconsistent and unreliable behaviours. Insecure avoidant attachment, which has long-term difficulty expressing sensitivity. And insecure disorganised, where the long-term effects are suicidal teenagers and personality disorders. In the majority of situations, consistent, loving and nurturing relationships develop between a child and their mother or caregiver, enabling an emotionally rich environment for the brain to grow. Secure attachment in early childhood enables self-regulation and healthy relationships into adulthood, and generally positive outcomes in adolescent coping methods and relationships. Emotional regulation as a result of secure attachment leads to greater empathy and in turn improves social relationships between the child and others. The most common insecure attachment associated with domestic violence is disorganised. This is a result of an abusive, chaotic and neglectful family environment. Globally, 30% of women have experienced domestic or family violence. The prevalence of domestic violence in our society results in an adverse effect on our children and damages the relationships that are vital to preserving our communities. Over 50% of women reported at least one incidence of domestic violence, while others report long-term DV with high levels of fear as a result. Children who witness domestic violence between adults or are victims of child abuse have insecure attachment issues. During times of physical violence, parents are unable to comfort and respond to the child's fear and distress. This in turn impedes the brain development and creates malfunctioning neural pathways that disallow the connection and attachment required for healthy behaviour. Impact of domestic violence on attachment. Children who have been subject to domestic violence experience trauma. This trauma takes various forms and leads to a wide array of social, psychological and spiritual issues. Lewandowski, in her 2002 study of the effect of domestic violence on adolescent peer relationships and mental health, discovered that child abuse resulting from domestic violence related to higher levels of depression and trauma in adolescents, whereas in younger children both the domestic violence and the child abuse impacted equally on the mental well-being of the child. This leaves the child with a poor sense of self and a tendency to see the world through a negative lens, impacting their peer relationships and engagement with others throughout life if left untreated. Those children whose mothers were victims of DV and suffered from depression and trauma were more likely to also suffer from depression. This would correlate with the premise of attachment theory and the damage of the secure relationship between the mother and child, creating low self-esteem and avoidant attachment. Children in DV situations often experience disorganised attachment due to the inability to predict whether the caregiving adult is comforter or enemy. This is especially true when the parent is the perpetrator, In this case, the child will often avoid the parent because of the fear and distress caused by the relationship. Children suffering from the impact of DV can present with the outworking of the trauma through numerous behaviours. These include post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociation, difficulty forming relationships, and inability to regulate emotions. As children mature, some of these behaviour may subside. However, without intervention, misshapen relationships will continue. Dissociation is often used as a defence by those suffering from trauma. It can also leave the sufferer unable to develop the narrative needed for improved well-being because of the impeded development of language and speech in the child. Ironically, articulating and categorising the trauma can reduce the impact of it on the victim. These different behaviours impact on relationships in various ways. Children living with DV could have trouble developing relationships because of the trust issues born out of the fear of the parent or perpetrator. They can become withdrawn and uncommunicative. Others will respond in the opposite way and demonstrate negative behaviour choices, argumentative and oppositional behaviours. The importance of early intervention cannot be stressed enough, as much success has come from these clinical practices. Spirituality, trauma and attachment. The foundations of faith in the child or young person primarily comes from the child's interaction with the primary caregiver. It's at this early stage in the young person's life when the mother nurtures and encourages the child in their discovery of God. If, at this stage of life, the child experiences DV in the home and the consequent fractured relationships in the family home, that this initial nurturing behaviour is affected. Depending on the age of the child and nature of the attachment to God, the outcome will be varied. Many children and adolescents gain meaning and self-esteem from their relationships with God. If this relationship is made unsteady by the threat of violence in the home, the God attachment can take two ways. The first is the young person will attach more strongly to God and use spiritual coping strategies, for example, prayer and the support of others, or the young person could blame God for fear and distress they are feeling, thinking it is the punishment or judgment of God. However, it is of particular note that Eliot found that those with a religious affiliation were able to cope with less post-traumatic dysfunction than those without. This emphasised the benefit of a relationship with God or spiritual belief system. Therapeutic interventions. Whilst domestic violence and disorganised attachment seem overwhelming and distressing for those experiencing the trauma, there is hope with a range of interventions found to be effective. Child-parent psychotherapy. This promotes protective caregiving and the development of secure attachment. It focuses on helping the parent and child regulate the emotional results of trauma and works at creating a shared narrative of the child's experience. Interestingly, this form of therapy was the first to demonstrate that disorganised attachment could actually be treated. The one intervention that's being used in the UK is Group Attachment-Based Intervention, or the GABI project. It targets trauma and poverty-exposed families with young children under 3. The program includes parent-child and parent-only and child-only components, and it assists not only in the parent-child relationship, but also to combat social isolation often experienced by these families through its group nature. The method relies on parents and children attuning their emotional states and being able to manage those feelings. Also in Australia, the Melbourne-based DV group therapy program, CASPAR, works in the relational domain with children and their parents or caregivers. It utilises a flexible approach that is broadly led by the child. It's built on the provision of a safe environment for the child and caregiver, especially in the light of the trauma experienced as a result of DV, where there is much fear and distrust involved. The therapy is based in attachment theory, systems theory and social justice. Long-term effects. If left untreated, the long-term effects for those experiencing disorganised attachment as a result of domestic violence is concerning. Dawson identified 2 main maladaptive attachment categories in adolescents: preoccupied and dismissing. Preoccupied adolescents are prone to general stress, loneliness, delinquency and likelihood of perpetuating family violence, whereas dismissing young people are withdrawn, overly self-reliant and have a decrease in their social skills. These young people were more prone to violence against self and others. This aligns with Bowlby's studies on attachment influences on adulthood relating to the different forms of attachment. Disorganised attachment as a result of domestic violence in early childhood, whilst heart-wrenching and distressing for those experiencing it, is treatable and early intervention is highly recommended. And and advantageous in combating the long-term effects. As a Christian working in this field, it will be imperative to remember that Jesus came to heal the brokenhearted and bring freedom to the captive. And this hope should underpin our understanding and confidence in God and in His ability to work.